constantly turn corners looking to see, like, well, is he there? You know?
Yeah.
Is he around this corner? Is he
Right.
over here? And there's still things like his cell phone was still charged from the day before.
Hi, my name's Daniel, and this is another episode of The Death of My Podcast, where I talk to this gentleman by the name of Jamie Nelson, who not only has been my mentor, my friend, the person that married Amber and I. He's been kind of every hat in my life, and he's been there with me since the moment my dad died. Him and my mom went down to the hospital together. So he's been a very solid person in my life. And recently his father just died, and we take a little bit of time to just talk about the death of fathers and kind of like his story and his dad's story. And I hope you feel encouraged listening to it, and I hope you can take away something out of it. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. Bye.
Hi, it's your dad. Just calling to say hi. Check in up and see how you're doing. I hope all is well. Everything's pretty much the same here. I'm doing okay. I love you.
Hi,
Hi, Daniel.
how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. How are you?
I'm okay. I think just a little tired. This is all so weird. Everything's just a little weird.
It's super weird, and it's also raining outside.
And it's supposed to all week.
And it's supposed to every day this week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just doesn't help. And then on the news it says like, this is supposed to be the worst week, right, for the curve or whatever.
I hope so. I mean, I hope it's the worst and it doesn't get like any worse than
Right.
what'll happen this week. That's my hope. But I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the worst part of it, is not knowing.
Yeah, it's a little scary. So, who are you? How would you describe yourself?
My name's Jamie. And how would I describe myself? I am, the way I normally describe myself is I'm a follower of Jesus. So there's this Christian faith aspect to me. That's a big part of who I am. I'm also a husband to my wife, Sarah, and a father to my 2 kids. And then at that point, I start to talk about my job usually. So I work at a church, and I do what's called student ministry. So it's like working with kids, mostly high school people, but also middle school people and some college people too. So that's what I do. The friends that I have usually don't describe me. So people always say, hey, how would your friends describe you? And I'm like, I don't really know how they describe me. I like to fix things. So whether it's like cars or, stuff that's broken around the house, or my hobby right now has been fixing coffee machines when they break, which is a weird hobby to have. So it means I drink a lot of coffee.
Yeah.
I'm currently drinking coffee right now.
love
So
it.
yeah, I know. What else about me? I like people, but I also don't mind being by myself.
Best of both worlds.
Kind of, yeah. There's probably a worse of both worlds side of that too. But yeah, so that's me. That's me in a nutshell.
Who died?
So my dad died in January. It was January 20th, which is Martin Luther King Day. He died, and he had been sick for a year, a little over a year, with pancreatic and liver cancer. And he passed away in Illinois, and I'm out here in San Diego area. So he died, and I wasn't there. I was here when he passed, and I actually flew out the next day. I was planning to go out the next day when he died with my whole family. So all 4 of us hopped on a plane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did you find out?
I got a phone call. So I was sitting on the couch. It was a Monday morning, and my wife kind of came running in. Like she was going kind of fast, and I could tell. Like as soon as I saw her, I knew what had happened.
You just
I
immediately
immediately knew.
Yeah.
I immediately knew. I could just tell.
Did you feel like a gut drop? Or...
Yeah, a little bit of a gut drop. I think there's just kind of like instant tears. They're just boom, they're just there.
Yeah.
You're like, what just happened?
Yeah.
And then my mom was on the phone, and she was crying and trying to talk at the same time. And she said, "I've been trying to get a hold of you, and my phone had been on mute."
Right.
And so I guess he had passed probably an hour, maybe about an hour before, maybe a half hour or something like that. And she got a hold of me and just said, you know, your dad died this morning. He died. And then she asked me to pray, which was really weird. So real quick, I asked her just a couple questions. I was like, so are you know, who's there?
Right.
And my brother lives close. So I asked, you know, is he out? Is he on his way? And she said, yes, he's on his way. And then I just tried to make sure that she was in kind of like a safe space.
Sure.
And there were people there who were there to help her. And then I prayed over the phone a little bit. And right as I was praying, my brother had walked into the room. And he had come in, and he said something to me on the phone. I don't remember what. And then he, I said, all right, you know, call me in a bit, because there really was nothing else to say at that point. And he was trying to get his bearings on what was happening in the house.
Yep.
And I got up and I went into my room just by myself. And then the next thing I remember is I could hear my kids crying.
Oh, like
because my wife told them, because the kids automatically knew like something had gone on.
Right.
They knew that we were getting on a plane to go see my dad, and they knew that he was sick, and they knew that he didn't have a whole lot of time. At least I think they kind of knew that.
Yeah.
It's hard always to tell what
The
kids really know.
older one maybe a bit more.
Yeah, the younger one kind of got an idea, and then he, in fact, you know, it's interesting when maybe it was a year before. I think it was a year before my kids knew that my dad was sick, but they didn't know what that meant. They just thought, oh, well, go to a doctor, you get better. Take some medicine, you get better.
Right.
And I had to tell them, I remember we were at the dinner table sitting down. I said, no, this is the kind of sickness that people get, and most people who get it don't get better. Most people who get it are going to die. And Oliver just looked at me, my youngest, and his face just like, he went from just kind of like looking to like this instant frown, and he just lost it, just started crying.
Sad.
Because he realized like, oh yeah, this is like the way that this goes.
Yeah.
But he was equating it, this is kind of interesting, he was equating it to the loss of a dog. Because one of my uncle's dogs had passed away, and he really liked that dog, and so he had grieved over the loss of the dog,
Right.
and so he was able to kind of, you know, put it together that this is how this would go.
That's why it's nice growing up with animals, because your kids can watch them die, and it's like a stepping stone kind of.
It kind of is. In fact, my mom and my sister, they had a little corgi dog. And that dog died maybe 5 years ago. And it was traumatic for the family.
Oh, sure.
And the dog died at home. It was like on a weekend. They couldn't get into a vet. They weren't sure like how it was all going.
Yeah.
And so the dog finally just like passed. I think it was early in the morning or late at night. It was kind of a strange time. And so the three of them just kind of sat there with the dog, and it was like this grieving moment. And to be honest, my dad kind of went the same way. You know, he passed, and it was in the middle of the night. There was no doctors or nurses or anyone else
At home.
It's actually early in the morning, but for them, they had kind of been up all night with him. So he passed away in the morning, and they just kind of sat there with him even afterwards. You know, it was a really traumatic time for my sister and for my mom and my brother too. But like you said, the animal thing kind of gave them a little bit of an easier path to navigate because you kind of can channel those same feelings,
Right, right.
a little bit, and
Yeah.
and realize like, hey, this is gonna hurt. But
Yeah.
obviously for them, it hurt, significantly more and deeper because they had kind of a pretty great relationship with my dad
Yeah. How long were
for
they
a long
married?
time. My mom and dad have been married for 48 years.
So crazy.
Yeah. They didn't quite make it to 50.
Yeah.
I thought they might make it to 50, but they didn't quite do it.
That's sad.
It's a lot of years. I mean, I'm 40, and I can't imagine, like my whole life plus 8 years being married. So the thing that gives me perspective, my parents got married when they were like 20.
Yeah.
So
Children.
yeah, totally children. Totally children.
So Sarah told you talked to your mom, you went
Yeah.
into the room.
Yeah.
What do you remember what you were feeling, what your body was doing, what you were thinking, what?
Yeah, I mean, just like it was. I think the way I described it is like I felt like I had an instant cold just because of all the like stuff in your face.
Yeah.
that crying just kind of it was like immediately. So it was just sort of these constant waves of weeping, of crying, physical. I mean, physically it does feel like you said, like you get punched.
Yeah.
Feels like there's an elephant stepping on your chest, sort of. It just, for me, it felt that way. And then there's kind of a helplessness of like, well, what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
So, feeling all of that. And then the one thing I do remember is I wanted to be comforting to my kids because they were also grieving. My wife is also grieving and trying to navigate that. But I couldn't. It was just me. I just had to do my thing.
Yeah.
Grieve in that moment and then figure out, kind of after that moment, what was next.
Yeah. One thing that I can't relate to, and I can't understand is like when I found out my dad died, the thought of even having to try to take care of anyone else other than myself, there's no way. There's nothing in you that can actually get you to, think about others at that moment. And that's totally normal and okay. And you're allowed to feel what you feel. And you eventually got around with your kids. And
eventually you get to it. I remember it's interesting. There's just like weeping in my house for I don't know how long. My kids probably cried straight for an hour and a half without stopping. Just and loud and like just, especially my older one. He really, really got into it. And for them it was a big deal because they prayed every day at dinner. They have like a routine of prayer.
Sure.
Before we eat, they'll say a little prayer, and most of the time I make them do it. I don't do it, and so. They usually pray for these two kids, Hazel and Allison, who are in El Salvador, who we sponsor. Send some money down. I've visited down there them like 3 times, and so my kids kind of know what they look like, and so we pray for them at dinner, and then we would pray for my dad. And so the habit of prayer had been praying that he gets better.
Yeah,
and I think I did tell my kids at one point, like, I don't think he's going to get better. Like, I don't think that's in the cards. I don't think that's what's happening. And I don't sense that that's what's going to happen. So they, I think it hit them harder. The shock of it hit them harder.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite the depth, at least. I'm still having a considerable amount of depth of grief and pain. And for me, and that's the thing too, right? For everyone, it's different.
Right.
The way everyone deals with it, it's like their own journey, their own path, their own amount of emotional expression,
totally,
or not. Some people kind of just bottle everything up, and I'm not one to judge that. If that's how they're dealing with it, that's how they're dealing with it.
Yeah.
I don't want to put that on anyone because it's their journey, right?
Yeah.
But my kids, at least the way my journey kind of went in all of that is it was probably a week and a half, 2 weeks before I felt like I came out of the real significant waves of grief. Like the physiological, like feeling like you said, you get punched in the gut or getting, sucker punched or kicked or whatever. It probably was a good 7-8 days, maybe a little bit longer.
Mm.
And there was kind of a moment when I felt like I got out of it.
Yeah.
And it was weird. I remember that.
You have a
Not,
feeling, yeah.
it was like a real feeling. It was interesting. A good friend of mine, I've been friends with him since high school.
Mm-hmm.
He called me. It was a Sunday night. He called me. He's like, hey, like the typical question, right? How are you doing?
Mm.
How do you answer that, right? You
It's the worst time in my entire life.
Right.
There's nothing around it. Yeah.
I'm as bad as I've ever been.
This is the worst.
This is terrible. Mm-hmm. And he called and he said, how are you doing? And then he said, I wanted to call you. I've been wanting to call you ever since I heard your dad passed.
Yeah.
And I was afraid to, because I don't want to say stupid stuff like I just said.
Yeah.
Like he's like, I just don't want to be the guy who says stupid stuff.
Yeah.
I want to help. I don't know what to do.
Right.
And he's like, but I'm just calling. And so I told him, I said, you're doing fine. Like, thanks.
That's
like
it.
You calling is really helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
And then he was remembering my dad, and he had known my dad. He'd been over to our house, that kind of thing. And he started crying. And he was feeling the emotion and the empathy, it was all, and I could hear it on the phone, and it was coming through. And so I just, in that moment, to me, that was the most comforting thing almost anyone could do.
Yeah.
He was feeling the pain with me.
Yeah.
And as soon as that happened, I realized, it was strengthening for me. And I didn't, I knew something had kind of shifted where I felt support.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like I had to cry or break down in that moment. It would have been okay if I did, totally would have been fine, but I didn't have to. And I don't know if I necessarily needed to or wanted to either, but I didn't have to. And it was okay for me to be who I was in that moment with my friend. And at that point, for me, that was a big kind of, change.
Shift.
Yeah, definitely a shift.
Yeah.
I guess maybe you could call it a fork in the road, or even just kind of a turn that I got through. And that was good. Actually, it felt good. I felt empowering in some ways. So
I love it because I've heard that before, and that is a peak in this whole thing. That was one major thing that happened to you that you'll remember for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and now that I told it, I'll remember it even more.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
How did the funeral process go? Or you guys flew out the next day?
Yeah.
4 of you, and then what happened next?
Yeah, it was a real weird deal. So we flew out, and we originally had bought our tickets and everything in order to get. Basically, I talked to my dad, and I said, Dad, before he passed, I want, do you want to see your grandkids one more time?
Yeah.
Because he hadn't seen them since the summer. And at first he's like, don't do that. It's too much hassle. It's like, I'm sick. I'm laying around. I'm not doing anything. I don't feel well. Like, just don't. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And my brother had even advised, he said, you don't really want to bring the kids out because, it's going to be hard for them. It's going to be hard for Dad because he'll want to run around with him and he can't, and all that kind of a thing. So I just decided not to. But the week before, I had talked to him and I said, Dad, do you really want this? And he said, I think I actually would.
You do want to see it?
Yeah, he said he did. And he's like, I think I really would like that. I'm like, all right, well, then I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah.
And so I just felt a sense of like, I got to make this happen sooner than later, and just buy the tickets, make it happen. So we did. We bought the tickets, made it happen. And he passed quicker than they kind of expected. And so at least in terms of kind of the short-term window.
Sure.
So when he passed away, we had tickets. Our original mission was to just go see him. It's kind of like, go see Grandpa we didn't want to say for the last time, but that was really the intention.
Right.
And then the mission changed immediately. And so the mission for the family was, let's go comfort grandma and sister and brother and all the family and all the people who want to help, let's go comfort them. and be comforted by being together. And so we really had a hard time weighing that option because you don't know. Like, you don't know how other people grieve. You don't know what other people need. And at the time, you don't really know what you need.
Right. You just found out too.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we had to make that decision the day I found out my dad died. Do we still get on the plane or do we not? And it was pretty overwhelming that, like.
Everything feel numb by any chance, or did you feel like you had your head on?
Head on, no. I think the whole, a friend of mine uses the term grief brain. That I like that term.
Yeah.
My mom has used that term because things just don't work right. You know?
Similar like brain fog, kind of.
Yeah, totally brain fog. So, like, your decision making is suspect when you're in grief, and even down the road for a considerable amount of time. You still feel like that. I probably would say I came out of that only within the last month, maybe. So, I was making decisions and working on things. My brain is just not at 100%. It's just not working that way.
Yeah.
So, in that whole thing, I had to lean on other people. So, I had to lean on my brother, had to lean on my wife, had to lean on my mom. Not as much. She was really, really out of it. But trying to lean on other people to help and to figure it out. So the process of, we flew out there, we got picked up at the airport by wasn't my little sister. I don't even remember who it was anymore. It
Family member.
Yeah, it was a family member. I don't remember if it was an uncle or whoever, but we got picked up and went to the house, and, that whole process was surreal because it was literally the day before he had passed away.
Yeah.
And so as we're at the house, we're looking and trying to see, you constantly turn corners looking to see, like, well, is he there?
Yeah.
Is he around this corner? Is he over here? And there's still things like his cell phone was still charged from the day before.
Yeah.
Like
little things. That
all the little things, and there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And my dad had lived in that house for close to 20 years. He had an office set up upstairs. He had just a lot of little spaces that were his little spaces. His car is still there. Like, it was like he was just out, to the store or whatever. But he wasn't. He was gone.
Yeah. Was he already gone from there?
Yeah, they'd taken the body away in the morning. Well, maybe it was around noon or so.
A little bit before you got there.
Yeah, a little bit before I got there, they'd taken the body away. And my brother did something very unexpected that I didn't know I wanted or needed.
Yeah.
But my brother had shown up probably an hour and 20 minutes or so after he passed. And my brother's a chaplain, like, professionally. That's his job.
Mm-hmm.
So he deals with grief and loss and people dying all the time.
Full-time gig.
Yeah, full-time gig.
Crazy.
And so, but it's a little weird when it's your own dad, it's a different thing. So he came in and he did this like little mini service that I didn't know where it even came from. He had like eucalyptus oil and did like an anointing service thing, which I've worked in a church for, decades, and I never heard of this. This is something that I don't know where he got it from. But it was really meaningful to my mom and to my sister.
Cool.
And he also decided to take pictures of my dad's body when he passed. He said, just in case you want to see them.
Yeah.
I knew he didn't text them or anything. He just showed them on his phone just to be discreet. And it was meaningful to me. And I didn't know if it would be.
Yeah.
Because, to be honest, the pictures just looked like, Dad sleeping on the couch. That's, that's all it looked like.
Yeah.
And so, we had, as a family, we just wanted to be together. And there's something healing, I think, of just being together.
Yeah.
Just having everyone in one house under one roof.
Your kids,
my
wife,
kids,
your brother,
my wife,
sister.
my brother. My brother and his wife have 3 kids, and so there's, 5 kids running around. And the 5 kids during that week, they were grieving. They were up sharing a room together, crying. Little kids, because they're like, they're upset. They didn't want Grandpa to be dead. And Grandpa was dead, and they're faced with the reality, and so they're grieving and
together.
Together.
There's beauty in that, and I feel
Totally.
I've talked about that on here a couple times. But the idea of like, we're so used to seeing people, or thousands of years, people, they lived in the house together. Grandma, grandpa would die in the house, but they had each
Yes.
other to get through that, right? You weren't alone, and to have a bunch of kids being able to do that together, like they'll
Yeah.
not only remember that forever, but there's that comfort of knowing that they're not alone. So
Yes.
that's awesome.
And being together was such a big deal. And,
Yeah.
you know, for us in that house, there's a lot of being together. There's family that wanted to be there that day. There were family members who kind of showed up out of nowhere. We ended up going back a couple weeks later for the memorial service.
How was that?
And that was crazy. I mean, it was good. It was crazy. It was
Yeah.
just a different kind of a thing, you know. A lot of family, a lot of weird family dynamics.
Sure,
You know, so
always.
that's just the way that goes. But typically people are on pretty decent behavior when they know that they're there to support each other, at least hopefully, right? So people were really good, but at the same time, you know, you get lost in all of it. Like you forget, because it's something to do. You know,
Mhm.
memorial service is something to do. It's work.
Right.
And when you have something to do and you have work, it helps distract you from
Sure.
the pain.
Because you spoke at it, you did a little.
Yeah. So my dad was a pastor for his whole career.
Mhm.
And he was the pastor of a church there and retired from it after he had his diagnosis about a year before he died. And so he planned his entire memorial service 3 days before he died. He sat down with another pastor and planned it all out. He planned out what songs he wanted to be sung. He planned out who he wanted to speak, what scripture he wanted read. He even made a list of who he didn't want to sing and who he didn't want to speak.
It's so rare to have that.
It's super rare. And the other rare thing, and I haven't watched it yet, my brother recorded that entire conversation on video. And so he has some video files of my dad talking with the pastor who did the memorial service.
Well,
Yeah.
And
And I
you-
haven't.
you're just waiting.
Yeah, some of it is technical because it's a super giant file that's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
easy to dump on something. But some of it also is just, hearing my dad's voice,
Yeah.
spending, really digging into that.
Yeah.
You need space and time to do it.
Totally.
It's not like you're going to drive to work or, go to the grocery store and have that on the playlist. You
Yeah.
know? It's like you need to separate yourself and just spend time on that.
Yeah.
And I just decided, when I'm ready, I'll know I'm ready and I'll listen to it and I'll watch it.
I had a few voicemails of my dad, and it took me about 8 or so months till I listened to them. And I
Yeah.
know someone that lost their mom, and she years ago, 4 years ago, I think now, and she still doesn't listen to the voicemails. Like, everyone's different, and but I told myself I would never listen to them, but then I ended up doing it. And so
Right.
it hopefully for someone that is listening that has that something, whether
Yeah.
it's the photos or the voice, or you don't have to. And if you want to, you can. It'll always be there.
Exactly. You don't have to, and if you want to, you can. And I would just say the only advice I guess I'd give anyone is if you have something saved, hold on to it. You don't have to make a decision then or there,
Right.
And that goes with stuff too.
Sure. Like clothing and
Exactly, clothing. My mom still has a house that's filled with my dad's stuff.
yeah.
And I have been looking at, making a time when I can go out there and just spend a week and
Going
figuring
through
out,
it.
What is there anything I want out of this?
Yeah.
Is there anything that's meaningful and what's not? Things that are meaningful are always weird. You
Yeah.
know, like there's in my dad's basement, he has a hammer. It's like an old basic hammer. It's the
Sure.
kind of thing you might buy at a garage sale for 50 cents.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be worth more than that.
Yeah.
Maybe $1 or something. Like it's not valuable.
Right.
But to me, I have memories of my dad having that as far back as I can remember.
Yeah.
And when he had that hammer, it was usually in his hand, and he was usually doing some work, and
Yeah.
I was with him. And
Yeah.
so, all of that stuff coming together is a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So his memorial service was at the church that he had helped build, the new building.
Hmm.
And so when he first came to that that congregation, the building wasn't there, and his memorial service was in it, and I've never seen more people in that room. The whole place was completely packed, and
Yeah.
then there's like the back area of the church, like the entryway, completely packed, and
So
it was
wild.
snowing outside, and there were people who were kind of almost like outside.
Yeah.
There wasn't parking. Like, it was like a big deal just to get everyone in the room,
So crazy.
which is crazy. So we did that, and that was meaningful. I had a job to speak. I was the only family member who did any kind of a eulogy. It was just a 5-minute thing,
Sure.
7-minute deal. And then I remember, in my mind the whole time I'm thinking, like, I just don't want to like totally lose it and not say what I want to say.
Right. Just break
My
down.
whole goal, my goal, and no one would fault you for breaking down. It's like
Yeah.
your dad died, but my whole goal was to say the things that I had to say to the people there, and then just to make that happen and celebrate my dad's life and all the good stuff, and we did, and that was good. I helped put a slideshow together before, which, man,
hard.
if you're gonna do a memorial service for someone, get someone to do the slideshow
Yeah.
for you.
For you.
Yeah, just and got to give, my sister-in-law actually did the majority of the hard work. She got all the pictures and put them all together. I just had to dump them into a file or whatever and make
Yeah.
it work. But those people who come in and just want to help, let them. And if you want to help someone too, that's the other part. Like, you kind of have to insert yourself until someone tells you to stop, because people who are grieving, like, I didn't know how to ask for help,
Right.
and I should know. Like, I've read books on this stuff,
Right.
and I should know how to do it. I couldn't ask
But
someone
when
to
you're
help.
in it, there's
Yeah.
nothing. And yeah, I remember just like being so thankful for you and people that reached out to me. That was just all the time. It's like, what do you need? What, you know what I mean? And
yeah,
and you just keep asking, and then one day you're like, oh, I actually do need, or like, I would like to talk about this,
Yeah.
but just keep asking, keep bugging, because no one's actually like bug, like, please stop asking how I'm doing, or
Yeah.
please. It's because, keep doing it.
I talked to my mom the other day, and it's amazing how the small things matter. One thing my dad always did was he made sure they had firewood, because they had a wood-burning fireplace. It's cold where they live, and they keep the house with like a normal heater at the same level.
Mm-hmm.
But if it is really cold outside, it's nice to have a fire in the fireplace. It kind of adds extra heat.
Yeah.
And so my dad always had firewood outside, but once he's gone, the firewood stops
Right.
showing up. So this guy, Jim, who is friends with the family, he showed up, my mom told me the other day, for the 4th time to keep reloading firewood for her.
Crazy.
Yeah. No one asked him to.
Yeah,
he
he
just
just-
came up and did it.
He knew.
Yeah, he knew, like, this is what she needs now, and this
Yeah.
is what I can do, so I'm going to do it. So that makes me feel better,
Yeah.
right? That helps me in my grieving, watching someone help my mother,
Yeah.
which
That
is
no one asked him to do. He's just
exactly
doing it.
no one asked. Yeah.
When you told your family knew. So when you told your friends, how did they react?
Friends, like, everyone reacts a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
Some people really didn't know what to do. There were some people close to me who really, really had no idea how to help, and called in other people to try to figure out how to help, which is kind of a weird thing to do. But like, they went around and said, "Hey, I want to help you or I want to help Jamie in his grieving. I don't know how to. What should I do? Help me.
Mm-hmm.
Help me help this person."
Sure.
And so there's some of that. Other people, people helped in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
I had people who helped with paying for airfare for all the unexpected travel, which was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up flying out like 4 or 5 times in the course of like a month, and one time with the whole family, and it became like a financial burden just to deal with some of this
It's
stuff.
a lot.
And then a lot of, there were people who helped out, a couple people who helped out with that. There were people who, and I would tell people straight up, I'm a person of faith, and And for some folks, saying you'll pray for him is almost like insulting. Some people, like, it is,
Yeah.
right? Like, I'll pray for you. Like, that's it. Like,
Yeah.
like, bake me like some dinner or something,
Sure.
but don't like just throw out a random idea. But for me,
Yeah.
if someone says, I'm going to pray for you, and they actually are, like, they're really going to do it, and it's a
Right.
real thing. To me, that was kind of the most helpful. The way I would describe it is I felt propped up in the grieving process. I felt propped up knowing that there were people who had my back,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the community piece you were talking about.
Yeah.
Having community around was huge.
Yeah.
As always, people who've been through similar experiences,
Mm-hmm.
really helpful.
Yeah.
Before my dad passed away, I was at a big convention. There's like 3,000 people there, and there's a woman that I saw, and I knew her father was also a pastor, and also had just passed away from the same disease.
Crazy.
And I saw her, and I went up to her, and we just barely know each other. And I
Mhm.
said, "I'm so sorry about your dad." And she said, "Oh yeah, it's been really hard."
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, my dad has the same thing, and he probably doesn't have a whole lot of time left." And her immediate reaction was, "You can call me whenever you want. We can, But just to know that there's other people who've gone
Do
down
the
the
same
road.
thing, yeah.
Yeah. And you going through, your whole journey and experience from the year before, it's
Mhm.
like knowing that there's people around who've been through the same thing has made a big difference.
Yeah.
And who are willing to acknowledge it and say, this happened.
Yeah. I one thing since doing all this grief stuff I've noticed is that there's a lot of parents that have died, right? Like which is normal, but it rocks people's worlds.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I feel like it's not almost given enough credit. Like even like people that are much older than us, that are in their
Yes.
60s, 70s, that their parents are still alive and they just died. Like it still rocks the world, and like there's something to that. And I just want to keep tackling into that because like
Yeah.
our parents, whether we're close or not, like it's like in our blood, right? That they were there, and I've yet to talk to someone that lost a parent that's like, you know what, I'm fine, it's all good. Like, no, it like really shapes you regardless of how old
Yeah.
you are, whether
Yeah.
you're a little kid or whether you're 70 years old.
It really does. And what's interesting about my dad is his dad, my grandfather. I never met him. He died in the 60s when my dad was only, I think, 14 years old. And that was probably the defining thing of my dad's life,
Changed everything.
was that his dad passed away.
Yeah.
And the way he experienced that is a priest came into his house and said, "Son, your dad's dead. I have to go, like, be with your mother or whatever. And so I'm sorry." And then he left.
Like toughen up.
Yeah,
Here we go,
kind of
yeah.
like, sorry, I have to tell you the truth, and telling you
Right.
the truth is going to be the most important thing, but I can't stick around for the mess, right? And so my father's faith and life was shaped by that event, probably more than any other event.
Yeah.
Very foundational for him.
Yeah.
So one thing that I did do, and I'm so glad I did, is before my dad passed away, we spent probably a couple hours of him telling stories of his dad
Cool.
that he remembered, and I recorded them.
Love it.
And so about a month ago, I finally mustered up the courage to listen to those recordings.
How was that?
It was good. What was weird about it is I listened to them, and it was almost like I was listening to them for the first time. And I was there the whole time they
Yeah.
were being recorded. I had heard the stories before, but when I listened to them this time, it was like they're brand new.
Something
So
different. Yeah.
yeah, so man, I treasure them. I'm like so glad that I have those.
Keep them forever.
Yeah. The first thing I did as soon as I started to listen to one, I'm like, oh, make copies of all this real quick.
Yeah, you have.
Just in case, all the
Yeah.
technology crashes.
What are your thoughts on death? What happens after we die?
Yeah. So the first thought about what happens after we die for me is a real important thing is that we don't know, right? So it's like a one-way thing. It's not like you jump out and poke your head in and say, oh, this place is nice, or this place isn't nice. Let's come back here to Earth, back to our normal lives. So there is an element of mystery to it that is inescapable.
Mm.
And I have a real hard time when people say, oh yeah, here's exactly what happens. You know, you enter into this room, you see this light, and then this thing happens and that thing happens, and this
Sure.
is how it is, right? But I also have a really strong faith background. And in that, there's some kind of marking points along the way. And so some of those marking points are really it's this idea of community, and this idea of the word communion comes to mind. In fact, my dad said at his memorial service, the one thing he wanted people to know is that he was excited about having what he would call full communion with God, meaning that him, God, and people and relationships will be healed and restored post this life.
Sure.
And to him, that was the most kind of exciting thing of the whole deal, right? You know, and there's all sorts of different like Bible passages about it and things that kind of give us a bunch of pieces with it. But I think the bottom line, and I think what I would want anyone to, you know, hear from, at least from my dad in his memorial service, is this idea of having full communion, fellowship, connection with God is kind of like the ultimate thing, you know?
Sure.
And that after you pass away, that is a possibility. And for him, it was not just a possibility, it was his expectation, probability, his joy. It was what he was looking forward to most. And he had a full, solid year of planning for this.
Yeah.
And not everyone gets that, you know? In fact, most people, by the time they get to the point where it's like a year out, they're not necessarily capable.
Their brains.
Yeah, right? They're not necessarily capable of even dealing with it.
Yeah.
My dad was fairly capable all the way up until like the last 48 hours, really. So he, you know, I went on his computer and I looked through his search history. That was like one of the first things I did because I had to get on his computer to find some other info for my mom, and I wanted to see like, you know, what does someone like look up in the last day of their life? You know, what was the last like search history that he had? And there were two things. The first one was, what was the life expectancy in India in like 1940 something or whatever it was? And I'm like, that seems really random.
Yeah.
My dad was born in India. His parents were missionaries. And so the town that they had done mission work in had a lot of medical missionary people who were doing heart surgeries and doing all this incredible stuff. And the mortality rate in that town when they started was like, I think the average was like, it was low. It was like 30 or something. So you weren't expected to live long in this town.
Right.
Tons of babies didn't make it, you know, past birth or even a year. Folks would get sick all the time. It just was not a great place to live. But it like doubled in the time that my grandfather and the doctors who were connected to him and to that mission had left.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy. And so he was looking that up because he wanted to get some information on some of the stuff that had happened in India. The second thing he looked up is how to take care of your spouse after they die.
Well,
Or after you die, kind of
Yeah.
a thing, right? It's like, how do you leave them behind with, you know, he was wanting to make sure that he had done everything he could to make sure that my mom was set up as best she could be set up, you know, with limited resources and, you know, limited abilities. But he was trying to do that to the very end. And, you know, that's a gift. I mean, I don't know if there's a good way to go.
how selfless can you be?
Yeah, right. And there's a lot of things that I'm happy about, you know, with, you know, one thing is like, if he had died today, right? If I had got a few more months with him, went out there a couple more times, and he had died today, he most likely would have died alone in some hospital.
Yeah.
Just because, you know, with all the restrictions of who can go in hospitals right now.
Right.
So some of it is like the timing of it actually was, it's never good, but it was better than had it been now or had it been a lot earlier.
Do you have, I mean, you kind of just said it, but
Yeah.
I have this thought of, you know, with what is going on with the virus and everything all around, it's like my dad being gone, it's like,
Yeah.
one less person I have to worry about, one less person to check in on.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah.
have that at all? Do you feel that?
Sort of. It's funny. I think, how has my theology changed since my dad's died? That's a big question for me,
Yeah.
right? So, I've studied theology. I've been very active in it a long time. But when things become personal and really hit you at the core of who you are, it starts to stretch some of those ideas you have in your head.
Right.
And so one of them is this concept, and I think my grandmother was even talking about it at one point, saying like, can you talk to people who've passed away, and can they actually hear you, right? And that's a big question. And so there's folks out there. My mom's therapist, she even was like, oh, don't worry about when your mom passes away, because you'll be able to talk to her through like a spiritual medium and stuff, which is like not what my mom's into at all,
Right.
But at the same time, like, I know that that's something, spiritualism in this country, even the last 150 years and longer, has been like a big deal.
Yeah.
And even people who don't have like necessarily a theology understanding of it, you want to talk to the people, right? And so I found myself at times talking to my dad, just saying, Dad, I miss you. Dad, I wish I could talk to you right now, and I can't.
Yeah.
Dad, I hope everything's good. I hope you're all right. And I think for me, those are those moments that sting. They're a little comforting, but they sting at times.
Yeah.
So if I get an extra 5 minutes in my day, my old habit was get out my phone and call the people I really want to talk to right now. So I'll get out my phone. I might call my brother. I might call my mom. But usually it was my dad as the person that I'd try to talk to first.
Yeah.
And so there's been times in my day where that's my go-to. I'm like, oh yeah, I can't call him. He's not here. And that's continued to go on. And at this point now, I'm like grateful for it. It's not like a pain, like it hurts, but I'm grateful for it because I don't want to forget.
Yeah. If you see a photo on accident or on purpose, like, do you still get emotional? Do you cry? Are you?
I get emotional. I haven't really done a lot of like crying or that like deep sobbing.
Yeah.
Emotion, yeah. I think for me, this is just kind of more of a guess than really knowing for sure, is if I was in his house with his stuff in his space, definitely I think there'd be more tears. I'm, a few thousand miles away.
Yeah.
Because of that, it makes it a little bit more challenging. I do have like some of his stuff. Like one example, or one thing that happened the other day is I was at my workbench in my garage, and I had a tool that's on there, and it's like a digital multi-tester thing that is still wrapped in the plastic. I haven't taken it out yet. And my wife looked at that and she's like, what are you doing with that thing? What is that thing even? And I said, that's the last gift my dad ever bought me. Because it was like a Christmas gift.
Yeah.
And I remember the phone call. He called me, said, hey, do you have one of these? And I said, no, I don't.
Yeah.
He's like, okay. I'm like, well, why? Do you have an extra one? He's like, no, don't worry about it. And he bought it. And he actually spent like more money than he should have on it, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so I have it. It's still wrapped up. I haven't used it because I'm like, well, I don't want to use it for just anything.
Right. Something special.
But my wife just broke down. She's like, you made me cry. Like, what are you doing making me cry? Tell me it's the last thing. But yeah, there's a sense of joy when I think about my dad that is still there, that kind of precedes the pain, if that makes sense.
Sure.
It kind of goes before it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things like, oh, if only my dad had a chance to do, X, Y, and Z. If only he, could have been at his church another year and, seen some projects through, or if only he was able to, in my head, I had all these ideas of things that would have been great. I wanted to do a trip where we went back to the mission field where he was born, just to see. And I talked to my brother about it, and I even found, someone even said they would pay for it. Like, how often does that happen? Right? Someone's like, hey, I'll pay for you to do this trip. And my dad just said, nah, I don't really want to go. Like, he was like, no, he didn't have any interest. And at that point, I'm like, oh, well then, no. Like, I have no interest in it if it's not something he wants to do. But, there's all those, like, I don't know if the regret maybe is the right word. Like, if only this had happened, or that thing, or whatever it is. There's a bunch of those things. So occasionally that stuff will kind of sneak in, and that'll just make me feel sad for the situation.
Yeah.
But not really sad for him, Yeah. I think now things have shifted completely, not completely, but really heavily towards my mom. For her, she lost a spouse. She lost a best friend. She lost, and I didn't realize this till later, my dad was her like spiritual partner. So in their spiritual journey together, they'd been together longer than anyone for each other. And if my mom was dealing with something, whether it's a spiritual issue, emotional issue, whatever, he was the first person who'd know about it. The two of them would pray for each other. They would help each other out. And she lost that. So, man, and there's an identity to being a pastor's wife, too. Yeah. She's not a pastor. She's the pastor's wife.
Sure.
He retires. He passes away. She's just a widow now, right? Crazy.
Yeah.
So her transition has been, that's been hard for her, really hard for her. So that, for me, that's like a kind of weighs heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you feel like either you need to just be there on every level for her at the moment.
Yeah.
Like, do you take on that weight of the spiritual?
Some of it, I try to take on. So, like, for instance, I'm the one who calls her I call her as much as I can. I call her way more than she calls me.
Sure.
Call, check in, how you doing today? Is today a good day, a bad day, whatever. And then, try to convince her before all of this coronavirus stuff. I've been trying to convince her to come out and see us, and just even to do that on a quick trip. If it's a weekend, do a weekend. You don't have to come out and camp out for a month. Just do a quick trip. Just trying to find ways that are helpful and just to be helpful for her. Yeah. But some of that too is she's got to learn how to do that stuff on her own too. So like the absence of my father in her life means she has to learn some new things,
adapt and change.
Yeah, and when you're 68 years old,
and 48 of them you've been with this person.
Yeah, right. So like, she hasn't had to do the finances for the family ever.
Yeah,
and now she has to do all of them. She hasn't had to do the bill paying forever. Now she has to do all of it. She hasn't had to, all that stuff just weighs pretty heavy on her.
And just try to figure it out and be on their own. My grandma, like my grandpa's in hospice right now, and I know my grandma is trying to figure out the exact same things, the exact bills and just how to keep things going and moving along. And I couldn't even imagine.
My dad did a really great thing for my mom. He got some pieces of paper out and he wrote down like every bank account, every, even down to his Spotify account.
Yeah.
My dad loved music.
I love it.
And he loved weird music. Like, if anyone wants to listen to some Lyle Lovett, like no one ever has said, yeah, I really could go for some Lyle Lovett right now. My dad loved listening to Lyle Lovett. I don't know why. It was his thing. But he had a Spotify account that was very active. He listened to a ton of music. Like and my dad was cheap, so for him to pay for Spotify Premium was like a really big deal.
Yeah.
So he had this Spotify account. He loved it, but he even wrote down all that info, and he put it all in one sheet so that my mom was able to, with one piece of paper in her hand, she could access all the accounts, there's nothing hidden.
Right.
And our family didn't have secrets, really. It was like everything was known, everything was out in the open, and man, that made stuff so much easier.
Oh, I'm sure.
It wasn't like we were discovering a bunch of crazy stuff as we were, digging through things in the house. Everything was out in the open. So that was good. I mean, that was just helpful. It was taking some of the weight off.
If someone is listening and they just lost someone, what would you tell them? Or if they just lost their dad, like make it more.
Yeah, if someone just lost their dad.
Yeah.
I think it really comes down to there's like nothing you can tell them.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing you can say that is that's going to make things okay, that's going to make it right. at first, I've always been appreciative of people who just told the truth, right? So, like, even in the shock of someone, I'm appreciative of the first thing my mom said. Your dad's dead. Like the truth, like that reality. I'm appreciative for it. I hated it, but I'm appreciative for it. And I think kind of the second thing is, it's okay to feel what you're feeling right now. Like that's what you need to do.
Right.
And not to beat yourself up over it, not to try hard to be one way or the other, and not to measure your grief against other people's grief and the way other people are dealing with it.
Yeah.
You gotta do it the way you have to do it. It might sound a little cliche, but at the same time, sitting with my two siblings, watching how they're grieving, none of us were grieving the same way.
Right.
Like kind of not even close. And so for us to be able to be okay with that, it's fine. So I guess that'd be one thing. The other thing you said too is just if you can handle people being around who you love the most, man, that don't run away from that. I mean, if you need your space, definitely take it. But it's okay to be around people. It's okay to make some decisions that will help you be around people. So if it's like, should I travel to go see the person who I lost or to be around the family? Yeah. If you feel like you need to, do it. If you got to put it on the credit card to make it happen, because you don't think it's financially responsible, probably this is at a time where that's okay, right?
Yeah.
Or, if you have to have a hard conversation with a boss at work that you're not going to be around because you're grieving, like people are very understanding, right? I have a lot of advice for people. Sorry, Daniel.
I love it. No, keep it going.
Take all the help you can get and don't feel weird about it.
Yeah.
Right. So if someone's like, hey, I'll make dinner for you, say, okay, great. I really love, gluten-free barbecue chicken pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Like whatever it is, like you can, be a prima donna if you have to about it, and let people say no.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Throw it on them and let them say no.
That's a good one.
And people are going to ask, they're going to ask you all the time, what can I do? How can I help?
Yeah.
And maybe it's not you that knows how they can help. Maybe you have someone who's close to you. Maybe it's a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a spouse, a sibling, a parent, whoever's close to you who can help out. If you have a list of even like ways they can help out, man, just take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And I say that for two reasons. One is it's good for you to get the help, because that, like where my parents live, there's snow everywhere. So someone who comes out and shovels their driveway and does that one time, that helps me knowing that people are caring. That's caring about me. That's caring about my family. Yeah. But it also helps them, because in helping out other people, they feel more human. Yeah. They feel more alive. They feel more connected to you. When you put up a barrier and say, don't help, I'm going to do this myself, or you're just like, you kind of are a little too prideful about receiving help.
Sure.
You don't get anything out of that, and they don't get anything out of that. So it's a total lose-lose. But again, maybe if that's your way of grieving and you just have to kind of put yourself in a little bit of a cave for a season, and that's how you got to do it. Well, I can't argue with that, Yeah. You got to do it your way.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Of course, man. This is good for me to do.
I appreciate it. And thank you for sharing. And
of course.
The only goal we have here is to have one person listening that can just walk away and feel like they're not alone. So I feel like you shared your story, and I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And thank you for helping me but you were there the day my dad died, all the way up till now. So I appreciate you.
I appreciate you.
Love you. Bye.
Don't give me coronavirus.
Hey. So, for those that are listening, and this is the first one or second one, but you have no idea who I've been talking to at the end of these, this is my wife, Amber.
Aloha.
And for like a minute or two, we just kind of talk about the podcast and then about me and how I'm doing. So, what'd you think?
It was crazy because I think you've said this like about Jamie, but he is like your go-to person.
Right.
And like knowing him, he's a very like stable and stoic person.
Yep.
So just like hearing his experience and like the vulnerability and just like the fact that it's like when he heard the news or like he just knew like what was happening, that he like just cried.
Yeah.
And just like picturing that and knowing him, and like it's just wild because death really affects everyone, and even
Right.
like the most stable like rock solid people, it's like they're human too,
Right.
and death is like a domino effect and it's gonna rock them. So
Yeah.
I don't know, it was just wild to hear his story and his experience, and just wild. So many emotions that you feel in that like first second of knowing. And
Yeah.
so it's also ironic that like you went through this months prior to him experiencing it,
Mm.
and it's just like this full circle like thing, which is wild
Yeah.
because like he has been your like solid person. So now like for him to be experiencing it, it's like just like crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. How was it like talking to him because he was there?
Right. For mine.
Yeah.
It was good, of course. I think, it's hard when you see your people have to like go through stuff, right? And I get that, but a lot of the people that I've talked to, or all of them except for him, I didn't walk through that with him. I didn't see it. This all happened previously before I knew most of these people. Does that make sense?
No, you lost me.
Great. So, for instance, like with Alexa's and Jackie's and other ones that are coming up, like
Yeah.
I wasn't there. I didn't see the before, during, and after. And
Mhm.
with Jamie, I saw the before, the during, and the after. And
Yeah. Is it ever hard for you? Like, do you associate that day with Jamie now?
no,
No.
it was two different things, totally.
Okay.
I do realize I have more empathy. If
How
that,
so?
I mean, before, like if someone said someone died, it's like obviously that's sad, but I couldn't relate.
Right.
I couldn't put myself in that level. But like if someone tells me that their dad just died or someone close to them just died, it's like my heart breaks. Because I know what that's like, not only to like lose someone so close to you, but then like all of a sudden everything around you just goes numb. Like that feeling.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like not even just that someone died, but like that feeling that someone's gonna have to go through.
Yeah. Like pit in your stomach.
Yeah.
Sadness.
Yeah. One thing I do relate with him and other people is that we do have that memory of like when it happened, like he'll remember that forever, like the moment it happened. And I feel like that's another thing that people don't talk about, but is that I did not feel that feeling alone. Jamie's not feeling that feeling alone. So and so and so and so are not feeling that feeling alone. Like we've all been there, and I think there's just another deep level of support that people listening, that if that feeling of remembering what happened and how sad it was and how awful it was is like, but you were never alone in that, right? Because other people have experienced that too, and I feel like there's some sort of comfort to that.
Is that like a perspective shift thing, like looking back, or do you feel that way like when you're going through it? Does that make sense?
For sure not when you're going through it.
Okay,
I mean,
that's-
everything is fogged over. But
Yeah.
looking back, it's
Yeah.
at least, okay, how about this? At least for me, there's comfort in knowing that other people have felt that too, and it's not just me.
Right.
I felt so alone at the time, even though people were around me, but I did not expect to at least have some sort of like this acceptance,
Yeah.
of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So how are you doing this week?
I am okay. I did not visit him this week. And I definitely got sad though at some point. I can't remember why or what happened. But sometimes it just kind of hits me like that it happened. If that makes sense. Like I know it happened and I can see it a million times. Like I could see photos and, you know, hear the intro to this and stuff. Like I know it happened, but sometimes it's just like, holy crap.
Yeah.
Like it really happened. And his birthday's coming
It's
up.
like a feeling thing.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of like what Jamie said. Like he just wants to pick up the phone and call his dad, but then
Right.
he's like, "Oh wait,
I can't.
yeah."
Yeah.
So
And
it's
that's
like a feeling thing.
yeah, and it's just like this you know.
Yeah.
But with his birthday and the day he died and Father's Day, like all this is coming up.
Yeah. All the like days
Yeah.
that will remind you
No
of the sadness.
No thanks.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But today I'm okay.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Love you, wife.
Love you.
Bye.